Let's you want to get it started?
Yeah, what's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamota, Danny, and blah blah blah.
Start it over.
What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Henry.
Welcome to another episode of Henry Fucks Up the Intro.
What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamota and Danny Abdel-Jabbar.
Yep.
What's going on, sir? How are you?
Chilling, man, as per usual. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. I'm looking right now at the Abu Azrael action figure that you sent me, and I think I want one.
Yep, we should get one for the show. Just put it in the background. I know that your wall of stuff is growing, so.
My wall of stuff is growing. As you can see, I have a portrait of a dog that my mom got me. If you guys are watching. So like half the podcast probably go up on YouTube. The other half are just on audio exclusively. But if you guys are watching or listening, you got to see this super sweet picture of this dog I have in my background. It's pretty beautiful. Also, new hookup. I got the House Zamota.
Nice. House
Zamota is my house colors. It's the exact same as the Lannister colors. It's the Lannister sigil from Game of Thrones, and it looks pretty sweet, if you ask me.
I don't think Abdel-Jabbar would fit on a pillow, but maybe I'll give it a shot.
I don't think you get a house, Danny.
I'm like Sir Davos, right? I gotta like get a couple of my fingers chopped off first, and
do you get a house when you're from Essos?
Sure, yeah. House Tyrosh is one of the larger ones that the Targaryens fled to when Robert took over the throne. So
where would you be from? Where in Essos would you be? Maybe you would just be Dornish.
Yeah, I think I'd probably be Dornish or like Dothraki or even Braavosi. I think I might be Braavosi.
Yeah, you'd be something exotic, or maybe Valenti from Volantis.
But I think I would be firmly like a Westerosi, right? I'd probably be living in Dorne, frankly, because in Dorne they have a lot of like trade with the free cities, right? So I'd be like a mix of Dornish and Braavosi or some shit, but living in Dorne, because that's basically my story here.
I'd probably be, I could definitely see that. I think I would be my girlfriend said that I would just be a Night's Watchman. That's all she said.
No, I could totally see you being from the Westerlands, where the Lannisters are from. I don't know about being a noble person, but you'd definitely be from the Westerlands, I think.
I'd be Clegane.
House Clegane?
House Clegane. Clegane, I sentence you to die. All right, guys. I'm not sure if you guys like the book Game of Thrones chatter, because we have a new tool that actually shows a drop-off on the podcast. I think last time we talked about Game of Thrones, there was like an immediate drop-off from the podcast. So I guess you should...
Thankfully, that was at the end of the show, though.
Yeah, it was at the end of the show. But I guess the first thing you wanted to confront me on was calling you a liberal.
Yeah, a typical liberal at that. You're on Mr. Sue, his podcast there, which was really cool. I got to give him a shout out. I think he did us justice. He really gave you a lot of time to speak and air out some opinions and things like that. So shout out to you, Mr. Sue. But when you were describing the show and specifically me, you were like, oh yeah, he's like a typical New York liberal, and I was triggered by it, and then I responded to the tweet, and he called me out for being a typical liberal and trying to start beef on Twitter over something stupid like that.
Yeah, I don't think that you are a typical liberal in hindsight. I think we just both come from very different paths politically. Mm-hmm. So we just had a different ride, but we're somewhere close together in our.
Yeah, we're definitely towards the center, I would say.
Yeah, you're more of a like your political path came from the left, and my political path came from the right.
Right.
I think that as Darren Carlin calls himself a political Martian, and I kind of like say the same thing, but there's definitely a major conservative tone to the way I think, and there's a lot of things from libertarianism and that I kind of that I'm very attracted to.
I mean, you know what? You say that, but I think as just knowing you for all these years now, and obviously from doing the show, I don't think that you're as conservative as you make yourself out to be.
Yeah, I probably don't. It's probably just I'm used to
not for a bad thing either. Like I'm certainly not calling you a liberal, but I think that we're typical millennials. If we're anything, we don't like labels, and if we have to give a label, we try our best to approximate it. And I think that's why you fall under like libertarian, or what's the other word that you call yourself? Paleo conservative. I don't have any neat words for what I believe that I am just yet. So I'll stick with the typical liberal for now until I can find a better term.
I don't share that many of my like ultra conservative thoughts on this podcast, to be completely honest.
Fair enough.
That's
don't want to alienate anybody. Yeah.
Not because I'm scared of alienating people, but it's just I feel like there's a venue of it, and you guys aren't tuning in to hear my fucking thoughts on specific topics you don't, or not tuning in to listen to. So I don't share them. My favorite writers are conservative, or no, actually, no, that's a complete lie. My favorite writers aren't conservative necessarily. My favorite writer is a conservative named Thomas Sowell. So other than that, though, I'm actually not really a big fan of many conservative writers besides Thomas Sowell, but he's probably my favorite writer.
Right.
I also really like, on the libertarian side, I'm a big fan of Rothbard. I kind of got my first taste of real political literature from Ayn Rand. So
Ayn Rand, yeah.
Yeah, I considered myself an objectivist for a while, but I kind of grew out of that and adopted more libertarian philosophy rather than objectivist philosophy. But I mean, you can call me whatever you want. You can call me a shithead as far as I care. Like, I'm fine. Most of the people I follow, though, who actually, I'm pretty split. There's some people on the left I follow too, but a lot of the people who I follow, media-wise, in the political circle, are libertarians. Like, I'm a big fan of Dave Smith. I'm a big fan of Michael Malice and Tom Woods and guys like that, and Ron Paul, obviously. So I kind of just like fall into that category, but like I'm definitely not the guy to go and debate Austrian economics. Like, yeah. I'm just not that guy.
Show, yeah.
Like you don't want me to debate Austrian economics.
Right.
I'll give it a bad name.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, you're obviously much better read than I am. So I won't rattle off like names of writers that political writers that I care very much for. But for me, what I try to do is expose myself to as many spheres of influence as possible. I've mentioned this on the show before, but I'm a big Redditor, and I like to make sure that I subscribe to subreddits of different political ideologies. So the basic ones are like our liberal, our conservative, our libertarian, and what I try to gather from it is, the nuggets of truth that are present among all of them. And I try to make determinations on my own. And that's why I think I tend to shy away from, a lot of these labels, because there isn't a label that I feel super confident that describes me, right? Or at least I haven't found one yet, and I kind of like not having one or not, checking off that box, because it gives me an opportunity to be open to hearing political ideologies from lots of different sides, because I don't have a camp that I can immediately retreat to, or I don't have a bubble that I can, live in. So I think that's like my angle. And that's probably why I come closer to the center, especially from, coming from far from the left, because I see truths in a lot of ideologies, and I don't think it's fair to pin myself down to any one of them.
Well, you want to be careful never to fall into an echo chamber, because when you're in an echo chamber, a lot of what you talk about just eventually becomes mantra, and then it becomes dogma.
Right.
So that's why I'm careful about getting myself into an echo chamber. And I'm actually really happy because, like when talking to people who listen to the show and seeing reviews and stuff like that,
Right.
it's pretty diverse politically.
I think so too. Yeah.
There's been a lot of guys, a lot of libertarians listen to this.
Mm-hmm.
Also, a lot of leftists listen to it as well. So, I'm sure that if you put both two sides of the people who listen to this show into a room, they probably not agree on much. But I think when it comes
except for the fact that bro history is the shit.
Yeah, except for the fact that bro history is the shit. And,
yeah.
They probably agree generally on our foreign policy stances.
I think so too. Yeah. Otherwise, they wouldn't listen.
Otherwise, they'd probably turn us off by now.
Yeah. But speaking of foreign policy, we did have a topic today.
Yeah, we did have a topic. We wanted to speak about Japan. I mentioned that we were working on some podcasts. One of them was going to be about Japan, and we wanted to. I guess I wouldn't call this a follow up episode to the one that we did, kind of like the casual episode we did. We did about the Japanese Empire, which was more of just kind of like a chit chat than a podcast, like an informative podcast. But it's been interesting over the past couple of, I would say maybe the past 2 decades.
Mm-hmm.
Japan has, obviously, I'm sure most people who are listening are aware that we were at war with Japan once, and Japan was essentially, leveled into, for all intents and purposes, all their cities were destroyed, and their government was shattered. And the U.S. went ahead and they drew a new constitution for them in 1945, and I think it was ratified in 1947. And that new constitution had a specific charter. It was a peace charter. And in Article 9 of that charter, it said that Japan I'll just quote it. It said, Article 9 says that Japan renounces war and use of force as means of settling international disputes and bars it from maintaining a military force. So over the past, I would say 20 years, this may go back even a little bit further than this, Japan has actually been building up its military quite a bit. They're actually a quite formidable force.
Oh yeah.
When compared to other countries. I don't know if you can give a little bit more context into where they stand among the world as far as military power.
Yeah, I think I'd love to talk about where they are, currently in a moment. I think it's still really, really important to harp on this charter, from Article 9 in Chapter 2 of their Constitution, because they basically said, in the next line that comes after the one that you quoted, it says, in order to accomplish the aim of the preceding paragraph, the one that you talked about, land, sea, and air forces, as well as other war potential, will never be maintained. Right. And I think that's super, super important, because clearly they're not following that. Right. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. It's just like interesting context, right? So we start off, it's 1945, and General Douglas MacArthur, accepts the unconditional surrender of the Japanese armed forces, and he did so on the deck of the USS Missouri. That was like September or something like that. And the background for when they wrote this Constitution was, we just got wrecked by the United States, and the conditions of surrender maintained that they, if we're going to let you chill and be your own thing, you're not going to cause any trouble around the world anymore. So part of that has to be that you just don't have a military, and we'll take care of it. We'll take care of you if shit hits the fan. But there have been some political, legal readings of their own constitution that allows for self-defense forces, right? So I think the kind of happy medium was, in about 1950, they said, all right, well, we can't just like completely rely on outside forces for self-defense. Like, we still need to be able to defend ourselves if someone tries to invade us, for example. It doesn't make any sense not to have any defense at all, right? And so right now, Japan is allowed JITAI, which is the Japan Self-Defense Forces, or the JSDF, not to be confused with the SDF, which is the Syrian Democratic Forces there. And that's comprised of, I think, three major branches. So we have the Air SDF, the Maritime SDF, and the Ground SDF. And technically speaking, legally speaking, they can't call them Land, Sea, and Air Force because Article 9 specifically prohibits them from using military forces. But because they called it self-defense forces, like a lot of people are arguing that that basically it's cool. But some people on the other side say that actually, no, that's a real military organization and, it's unconstitutional. Obviously, the Japanese government thinks differently, which is why, we're getting to where we are now. So Japan's self-defense forces makeup is pretty straightforward. They've also got a commander-in-chief. Right now, that's the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. But they also have a Minister of Defense, Takeshi Iwaya, and their Joint Chief of Staff, Koji Yamazaki. So important, I want to underscore that Minister of Defense position. I'll get to that in a moment, but that's pretty important. Their military is just like any other Western-style military. 18 to 32 is eligible for enlistment. They have about 250,000 active personnel and about 63,000 reservists, and they spend quite a bit of money. So their budget right now is about like $50 billion US. So they're ranked like 8th or 9th in the world for military expenditure, which is huge, right? Especially for a country that says that they won't have a military in their constitution. Of course, that's kind of an insignificant portion of their GDP. It's like 0.9%, which isn't very much at all. It's not even a full percent. So that's what we got going on right now. I think it's important to kind of figure out, like, how is it that we got there? So do you have any questions before I kind of move on about like the makeup of Japan's self-defense forces right now, or?
Yeah, I think another thing that they do as well is that they also act as like disaster relief and Coast Guard work and stuff like that. Like
yep. They do a lot of humanitarian work,
border control, things like that. So it's like an all-purpose type thing. They do pretty much everything that's related to armed forces.
Right. So they were super active, for example, during the Fukushima nuclear meltdown, that followed the tsunami. And they've been deployed all over the world for different humanitarian reasons. But a lot of their missions are changing. So where I really want to start is like 2001, because this is like the for modern geopolitics. I think 2001 is like kind of a big starting point, and that's with obviously 9/11. But in 2001, they had an anti-terrorism special measure law that was passed. And basically what it said was that the JSDF is allowed to engage in international efforts to basically stop terrorism, right? And that's big because previously Japan's policy was like complete non-interventionism, non-involvement, right?
They're still pretty much non-intervention when it comes to, I guess, the foreign escapades that the U.S. is involved in.
That's changing a little bit, and I'll point out a couple of examples. So, for example, I'll get there. So 2006, I think this is a big one. I mentioned this earlier about the Minister of Defense. But so previously, Japan's military was a defense agency. It's effectively was the same thing as it is now, but they raised the kind of the status of their military to being led by like a cabinet level Ministry of Defense, right? I think that's important. I mean, effectively, it doesn't do very much, but what it says is they're putting their military in a high position of power, right? Not, of course, above the power of the government, but what they're saying is like, we recognize this is a big deal. This is important. We want to appoint cabinet members to this particular ministry. I think that's kind of where it all started escalating a little bit, because now they're, in the limelight, right? It's official. 2007, just a year later, the Japan Self-Defense Forces decided that they're no longer solely defensive. So they can start dispatching their ships specifically. They've been moving their ships around to stop things like piracy, right? and like whaling and shit like that. But piracy is the big one. So their first post-war overseas base, they have a base in Djibouti in Somalia, which is interesting. And they were like literally actively fighting pirates in the sea. So that's, I mean, pirates weren't bothering them particularly, but they're doing their thing. And then in 2007, same year, the prime minister basically said, Constitution doesn't actually say that we can't have nukes as long as we're like being like nice about it, and they're only like tactical weapons and we're not trying to attack people. So I actually don't know if they have nukes. Pretty sure they don't. But their current prime minister was like, yeah, we could probably get those. Like we should be able to have those. So I think that's huge, right? They're moving the goalposts. Like this is the only country in the world that's ever been like nuked. And now they're saying, yeah, we could probably have a few nukes as long as they're small ones, like little baby ones.
What I can imagine, they don't have nukes right now. The Japanese public is pretty against nukes, just having experience firsthand going through what a nuclear and atomic bomb feels like. I mean, look what happened to them after they got nuked. Look at their television, for example.
Yeah, seriously.
You have to be nuked to think of Pokemon and Mario.
Yeah, and like giant robots and shit like
and
that.
Dragon and tentacle porn.
Yeah,
and the absurd really prank shows that they have as well.
And their game shows are so fly. I love their random ass game shows that make no sense.
They make absolutely no sense, and their prank shows are so mean spirited and funny that I saw a Japanese prank show where they had this guy in a business meeting, and they pretended like there was a sniper in the other building, and all of his business associates are getting shot, and like blood was coming from their suit, and everyone's just laughing as this guy is about to have a heart attack. I felt like, oh my God, I felt bad for him. And I was like, this guy's having a heart attack right now. And his friends and family are in the other room, like laughing at this. All right. I wanted to make a point. So as for Somalia, I'm just speculating off this. I could be totally wrong, but my head jumps to their military presence in the Horn of Africa would be to making sure that they could and should secure shipping lanes in those.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But it's no longer a defensive posture. Like they're offensively seeking pirates. Like they're not supporting shipping lanes by like following big ships and making sure nobody fucks with them. They're like going out and finding them and like doing shit. So that's pretty interesting. Where was I? Okay. Notes. Okay. So 2015, Japan's National Diet enacted kind of like a bunch of military legislation. And what it was a bunch of different small things, but what it basically boils down to is that Japan has the ability to, and I'm going to try and quote this, it allows Japan's self-defense forces to collectively self-defense of allies in combat for the first time under its constitution. So what it means is that if their allies are being attacked, they can self-defend alongside their allies. And that's different from the original charter, which was, we won't attack anyone unprovoked. Now they're saying, hey, if our allies get provoked, then we'll jump in. And I think what they were trying to say was that, by not defending or like supporting, allies, like for example, the US, then Japan would be at a weakened self-defense state, because then they wouldn't have the capacity to defend Japan. So they're totally cool with like defending military, US military bases within Japan, but also just collectively self-defend all over the world, which is pretty interesting. Very, very recently, I think, we've been ramping up with Japan too. So in 2018, we did the biggest military exercise in Japan, and that was in October. So not too long ago, just a couple months. It had 47,000 servicemen and women, and 10,000 from the U.S. So we're talking about like almost 60,000 people, and they did Navy moves, air combat, ballistic missile defense stuff, all kinds of crazy stuff. This was a huge military exercise. If you're interested more in military exercises, you could probably listen to the military exercise that we did back in 2002 against Iran. We did an episode on that one, but that's huge. I mean, it's not just Japan doing these things. Internally, we're also promoting them, right? We're saying, hey, cool, like, let's train up together. Let's do these giant war games. Let's do these exercises. Let's make sure that you're propped up well against threats like North Korea or like China or, to a certain extent, Russia. I think that's super important. And now we're at this point where, and this is kind of like the topic that I'm super excited to talk about was, Japan's 2019 midterm defense review basically said like, hey, we're gonna start building our own stealth, like 6th generation stealth fighters. And that's crazy.
Just to go back, like, don't you think a lot of this has to do with just thumbing China at the nose, or thumbing the nose to China, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely
because the pretext of a lot of this defense spending over the past 2 decades, has been the threat of North Korea.
Right.
Now
that was the obvious one, and now it's
that's the obvious one. But we've had multiple episodes about that, about North Korea, its actual threat. Oh, fucking siren! Do you hear that?
No.
All right, I'll just keep on going. We've had multiple episodes about the North Korean threat and stuff, and I mean, it does seem like things are gradually dying down there. I don't think they're going to be a threat for decades to come. The main thing, though, this fucking siren.
I'll take over.
These two guys honking at each other.
I still hear the hammering. The hammering.
I still hear the hammering. I still hear the hammering. We'll do it live. All right. What was I going to say? All right. Yeah. So North Korea is not going to be a viable justification to ramp up their military spending for long. And I think I suspect a lot of it has been due to China, and China has been increasingly aggressive in the South China Sea.
That's right.
And I think that they want to present themselves as someone who will stand up to the bully state China, specifically those countries in like the South Pacific, such as, Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, countries like that.
Right. Because those countries definitely don't have a chance, like
obviously those countries don't have a chance. So it's like Japan is
they're stepping up.
They're stepping up, saying that we can stand up to the big bad bully, and a lot of it has to do with, I think that they just want to be able to put themselves in a position for better trade deals and things like that.
Right. There's an economic incentive there too. They don't want to get pushed around. I get that. I totally understand. I think it's unfortunate that they the context made sense for when they drafted their constitution, coming off of World War II and the aggression that they had during that war. Like, it was legitimate, it made sense that their new constitution would have, been drafted around peace and not maintaining a military force. But at this juncture, we kind of need Japan to step up, like, yeah, U.S. military forces are out there and we've got the best Navy in the world and, some of the best military tech and stuff like that. But we still need people in the region to like police their own damn region, So I don't know. I'm split on this. I don't love, military posturing, but at the same time, I totally respect Japan's, intentions of just, standing up to bullies when bullies are around,
Well, it's not like the Japanese Empire is coming back and they're going to start brutally invading, Manchuria and other countries in the Pacific. Like, I don't foresee that happening anytime soon.
Yeah, well, I also
the culture in Japan
possible,
the culture in Japan is very different than it was during World War II.
Right. Very much.
It's very much. I'm no expert on Japanese culture. I do play the occasional video game every once in a while, but it doesn't make me it doesn't make me an expert on Japanese culture. There's a lot of people like that who I think they
like a bunch of weebs.
yeah, they like love anime so much that they're like, ooh, ita mita, oh. I'm an expert on Japanese culture. I like to live the way of Naruto. That's the most famous one, right?
Naruto.
Oh, Naruto. Only you would know. I like Western fantasy. Actually, there are some animes I like. I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, the culture in Japan has largely changed. Like from my perception, it's largely just changed over the years. From what I've heard from other people who live in Japan, that Japanese society is largely apolitical, but at the same time, they're super supportive of I mean, most of Japan is very supportive of the military.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, I don't think they really think about it that much. But I could be wrong. I got to give something more Japanese. We've never had a Japanese expert on this show.
I'll find one.
Ryan Dawson's a Japanese expert. I'll ask him.
Yeah.
He lives in Japan. He could speak to this stuff really well. But yeah, go on about the stealth fighter. Sorry, I took us off. Took a round.
No, that's totally fine. I obviously I nerd out about military tech, and just recently got an article that had said that Japan's working on some 6th gen fighters. A little bit of context for this, for those folks that haven't listened to our episode on the F-35. So the F-35 is a 5th generation stealth fighter. And that's important because, you know, the first thing that jumps out of your mind is like, what is this, iPhones? Like, you know, they're coming out with a new generation every year. Like, this is crazy, right? But actually, when I read into the article, the move makes a whole lot of sense, right? As we know, the F-35 kind of leaves some stuff to be desired, right? Specifically for Japan, right?
You mean Japan doesn't want to get kamikazes? They don't want to berate their enemies with F-35 kamikazes?
No.
That's what we got right now.
No comment. So no, it's important for Japan because we can bitch all we want about F-35s, about its strengths and its weaknesses, but at the end of the day, Japan just doesn't want them, right? I mean, they have a few, and they're going to buy a few more, but they don't want them. The reason why they don't want them is the bullies in the region have better tech, and they're an island nation, and their charter is for self-defense, and the F-35 is an attacker, right? It's an FA, right? It's a airplane that is capable of dogfighting, fighting other planes in the sky. But really, its intention, its intended use is like sit back in, beyond the visual range and fire a couple missiles and fire them against both air targets and especially ground targets and sea targets. So the F-35 it's a strike, like an attack vehicle, right? It's intended to fly stealthily, not be seen, network with other airplanes and other ground-based radar stuff, so that we can attack things actively, like proactively. But that doesn't really help them very much when Russia sends over, some Sukhois, or China sends over the Sukhoi clones, the Chengdong J-20s or whatever. It doesn't help them because those planes are air superiority planes, right? They will dominate things in the sky, and they have some stealth, capability as well. What Japan really wanted was the F-22. The F-22 Raptor is a badass plane, and it is far and beyond more agile, more, capable in air-to-air combat than the F-35 ever will be. And that's important, right? That they want to be able to defend themselves and their airspace if there's a threat from the sky. And I think Japan just had enough of this F-35 nonsense, and we're like, you know what, fuck it. We're just going to start building 6th generation. So they're jumping a generation. They're like, forget it. We'll buy a couple F-35s just because, because they're useful in certain situations, but like we have to build something else. That's super, super interesting because it is going to be a very expensive project. And they won't even be flying around until 2030. And that's the important part. They're getting the jump on the 6th generation now, because they understand that by the time they need the 6th generation fighters, it'll already be too late to start working on one. And I guess they're not fully confident that the United States is going to deliver on that.
What is the difference between a 6th generation fighter and a 5th generation fighter? There's people who claim that there's no such thing as a 5th generation fighter.
I mean, yeah, that's the controversy floating around. The generations aren't super clearly defined, especially the later generations. The early generations were like, we talked about this in the F-35 program. The early generations were like going from a propeller airplane to like a jet airplane. And then once we had jet airplanes, there was like going from a jet airplane to one that can fly supersonic, meaning faster than the speed of sound, right? And then there was a couple of other iterations in between. It lands us firmly right now in the spot where we're at on 5th generation fighters, which is supersonic, super cruising fighter airplane that also has stealth capability and a bunch of like technology around networking with other planes. Now, I guess the idea would be that the 6th generation fighter would probably be like, if we're talking about iPhones, if this is the iPhone 10, then if the 5th generation plane is the iPhone 10, then the 6th generation is probably going to be the iPhone 10s. Not a bunch of like, giant improvements. No enormous leaps and bounds ahead, but definitely better, more equipped for future fighting. And I think, we're not really going to find out until I think it's November of this year when Japan does the budgeting for it and also specifies what the requirements will be. So we'll have to follow up with this later in the year to see exactly what they decide and determine as what a 6th generation fighter should look like and how it should operate and what they're, what they need. But this is important. So Mitsubishi is going to be building it, right? I thought they were only good for the cars and the and the microwaves and shit, but evidently they're also still making airplanes. And this is going to be called the Mitsubishi F3 Air Superiority Stealth Fighter. But I'm sure in the native Japanese it's probably much cooler and longer.
The robot dick.
The Shining Sun Ultimate Battle Airplane Weapon of the Future.
Be named is like Hokorokte. Oh, Toki.
But yeah, so they're building it on the they have this one project, the Shinshin X2, which was basically just a demonstration plane for air superiority. I think some of the cool features that they hope to have on it is obviously stealth capability, right? They want to make sure that it's invisible to radar or very close to it. The Shinshin X2 has a radar cross section the size of a giant beetle. I read that somewhere. Again, radar cross section being how large the object appears in radar when it's picked up by radar. So really big object, it's going to set off a whole lot of alarms. An object the size of a beetle, they're probably not even going to notice it, right? They're definitely not going to notice it, So that's going to be an important portion of it. But they're also building their engines to be thrust vectoring. What thrust vectoring is so they're if you look at an airplane, and I'm describing it like how I would describe it to my 5-year-old self, the part where the flames come out in the back of the jet, right, where that pushes it forward. Well, it would have two independently moving nozzles where the thrust would come out. And thrust vectoring means that they can manipulate the nozzles so that it can do crazy shit like backflips in the sky. So it's much more agile and stuff like that. Potentially, it could help with, jump jetting, right? Like just coming off the ground from a stationary position, or making use of a shorter runway to take off. And what's super interesting about that is that they're building these thrust vectoring systems to be smaller than the current F-22s or the current F-2. But smaller isn't necessarily worse. Smaller just means they have more room for weapons inside, right? So that means they'll be able to carry much more ordnance, which makes them much more capable in the sky. But they're going to try to figure out a way so that they don't lack in power output, so that they can still fly with the best of them. I'm interested. I want to know, in later this year, like, I would love to see if they, put out a statement on like how fast they want these things to fly, or like how far they can cruise, or, without refueling, or, how many weapons they need it to hold. I'm nerding out a little bit about it. I think it's definitely going to spank the F-35. If I know anything about the Japanese, they know, they know what they want, and they're probably going to build a Gundam for all I know.
If it's anything like a Toyota truck,
it'll be built to last, right?
It will be built to last forever, and it will get in the hands of jihadists.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's follow up on this topic. All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening today. Make sure you like and subscribe, rate and review, all that good stuff, and we will see you soon.